Daniel cautioned me. "Don't forget to lock up. I'm entrusting you with the place," as I watched his leaving form from the doorway. I nodded, forcing a grin from under the tight knot of uneasiness in my chest. Something clicked, and the door closed behind him, adding to the abrupt emptiness that descended upon the place. Daniel's parents were somewhere in the home, but it didn't feel like they were there. I inhaled deeply and turned back to the kitchen, where I saw everything spread out on the dining table. Spread across one end were Jacob's golf magazines, mixed together with Linda's abandoned knitting projects and her own laptop for work. What had once been a tidy house now seemed like a battleground of trash. With a quiet sigh, I moved to lock the door by giving it a firm twist. I turned to face the kitchen, the weight of responsibility buzzing in my head. I wanted some alone time, away from the demands that seemed to mount up when Daniel wasn't around. Linda's voice drifted from the living room, interrupting my thoughts. "Catherine, could you be kind and make some tea for me?" For a moment, I gritted my teeth and held back a sigh. No matter how little the request, it felt like a chink in my patience. Wordlessly, I filled the kettle with water, resigned to my life's constant instability and the habit of caring for others. Angry that no one else appeared to notice or care, I cast a quick glance at the pile of bills growing next to my laptop. Before Daniel's parents moved in without warning, there had been a beautiful moment between us. Before our first anniversary had even passed, they arrived, their car piled high with bags and a note saying, "We need to stay for just a while, dear." Now that while had dragged into several months. Jacob yelled from the living room, "Catherine, join us!" He never quite asked, always speaking in a forceful tone. Confronted, I complied, lugging Linda's tea into the disorganized living area. She accepted it without saying, "Thank you," her eyes fixed on the TV. Jacob started by saying, "So Daniel mentioned that your work is going well," his gaze flitting over my messy appearance. "Yeah, it's keeping me occupied," I said, making myself sit on the couch's edge. "Being busy is good, but don't forget your responsibilities at home," Linda added, smiling smugly as she stirred her tea. The dialogue repeated itself, with my professional accomplishments being eclipsed by their limited perspectives of my duties. A week earlier, with a worried expression, Daniel had stated, "Catherine, they're just old and set in their ways. It will improve." However, it hadn't. Catherine felt betrayed by Daniel's optimism, despite their deep love for each other. For him, it was very important to keep his parents happy, but Catherine found it to be intolerable. Catherine swallowed the response that was beginning to develop in her mind and bit her tongue again. Her laptop beeped with a notice, a last-minute reminder that she had a client meeting in 10 minutes. Catherine said forcefully, "I have to get back to work," getting up from her unstable couch seat. Every interaction with them felt like an endurance test, and her heart raced. With a dismissive gesture, Jacob turned back to his newspaper. Linda, absorbed in her crocheting at the table, nodded absently. I cleared a place for my work by pushing aside their belongings, feeling the weight of my situation crashing down on me again. Could I wear one more facade? How much more giving in could I bear? Daniel's laid-back disposition seemed like a bygone era, having been replaced with a disquieting sense of comfort. With every day that went by, my perfect dreams of a married life disintegrated under the persistent shadow of his parents. The sound of the kettle whistling suddenly cut through my daydream. Linda needs another tea break, and I need to prove my patience once more. I wondered if I would ever be able to bring our house back to the peace I had previously imagined as I threw the boiling water out the window. Long days of meager sacrifices were ahead, yet something within of me ignited a flicker of resolve. There had to be a sacrifice made, and I refused to be that person. "Catherine, there's an issue with the dishwasher again. It never occurs when Daniel uses it." Working at the dining table, my concentration was broken by Linda's words. I inhaled deeply and grasped the edge of my laptop. "Daniel isn't even familiar with its usage. He never cleans up, I shot back, trying not to let my annoyance get in the way. Linda's gaze grew strained. That's because he works tirelessly all day, unlike you who can work from home and continue to make a mess. My patience was beginning to wear thin. In an attempt to break up the talk, I stood up and went to the kitchen. Linda followed me, her snide presence occupying the room. To pass the time, I opened the dishwasher and played around with the controls. Jacob popped up in the doorway, looking pleased as he leaned on the frame. You wouldn't have faced these issues if you just did things correctly, Catherine. I lost all composure and angrily said, maybe you two might help out once in a while. Jacob laughed, and I found the sound irritating. Help? Here, we are visitors. Your responsibility is to ensure our comfort. I lost her temper and slammed the dishwasher shut. It was obvious that they would not care about whatever I said. I retreated to the dining table and attempted to lose myself in my work, but I could not resist being drawn back into the poisonous atmosphere of their company by their voices. Daniel made a fleeting appearance, which did little to relieve the tension that had been building all day. This is when my evening took a turn. He looked from his parents to me and said, Hey, Catherine, everything fine? Simply put, just peachy, I shot back, sarcastic throughout. Your parents tend to think I'm the maid. Linda spoke out defensively, saying, Daniel, we're asking for a little favor. It should be manageable for Catherine. Daniel scowled, appearing confused and guilty. I apologize, Catherine. Can we discuss this later sometime? I shook my head and pushed back my chair in frustration. Daniel, no. We must discuss this right now. The strain caused him to wilt, his eyes darting tensely in his parents' direction. He whispered, Another time, okay? I left with a conflicted sense of hopelessness and rage. Daniel's avoidance and their manipulation were causing a bigger rift to develop between them. On a whim, I went upstairs to see my credit card account and froze. I yelled, and my voice reverberated throughout the home. Daniel scrambled up the stairs, his parents following closely behind. What is it? He inquired, puzzled. Was it you who used my credit card? Showing him the statement full of expensive payments I never made, I made a demand. Daniel had a blank expression. No, I didn't. Jacob confidently moved forward and said, We did. We thought it was okay even though we needed a few items. You assumed, I repeated, my voice tinged with wrath and astonishment. You charged several $1,000s without asking? Linda became icy-faced. Catherine, we're a family. They also own what is yours. No, I cried out, trembling with rage. That's not how this works. I was so furious that I hurled the credit card statement across the bed. Daniel's pale face betrayed his helplessness. I will speak with them, Catherine. I swear. Daniel, if you don't follow through on your promises, they mean nothing, I remarked firmly, my dismay evident. I've had enough. Then, leaving them to wallow in the mess they made, I stormed out of the room. Downstairs, their words went on, but I ignored them, feeling even more alone. I required a strategy, a way to take back my life. Something inside me began to flare with resolve. It was time for things to change, and I was going to make sure they do. I had had enough. As I plunged myself into work, the days melted together. Despite the mounting projects and approaching deadlines, I took odd comfort in my work. Every design and every meeting with clients kept me far from the chaos at home. My coworkers encouraged and praised me when they saw how committed I was to my work. Catherine, you've been on fire lately, Noah observed, leaning against the wall of my cubicle. How do you accomplish that? It's called survival, I said in irony, but I wasn't entirely serious. Noah chuckled. All okay, keep going. The management has taken note. If you receive a promotion in the future, I wouldn't be shocked. His words kindled a little glimmer of optimism. I had control over one aspect of my life, at least. Things were just as bad as they had always been at home. Jacob and Linda were becoming more and more dominant. They piled their stuff into the house, moved my stuff without asking, and watched over every part of my life. It was oppressive. Linda had rearranged my workplace when I arrived home one evening. "Linda, what exactly are you doing?" With a voice hoarse from a hard day, I asked. "Your area was overly disorganized. I'm handling the arrangements," she casually said. My teeth tightened. "I like my things wherever they are." Without pausing, she said, "Well, this way's better." The conversation became heated over dinner. Jacob smirked and said, "Catherine, maybe you might want to take cooking Catherine S's. Your meals could use some refinement." I looked at him, perplexed as to how he could be so taunting. "Maybe you ought to cherish the fact that I'm cooking at all." Jacob laughed and looked across at Daniel. "This is what I mean, see, son. A small act of appreciation goes a long way." Daniel, caught between us, appeared uncomfortable. He said, trying to avoid starting another argument, "Let's just eat." The tipping point was reached when I discovered additional frequent transactions in my bank account. It was for a pricey spa package this time. My arms full of the bank statement, I barged into the living room. "Who did this?" With a quivering voice, I demanded. Linda's countenance remained unaffected when she lifted her knitting. "We required a rest. It's not that significant." "Significant? You took my money and didn't ask again," I yelled, at last losing patience. Jacob leaned back, his expression smug. "Catherine, calm down. We are related. We own what is yours." "No," I snapped, trembling. "That's not how this works. You spent $200 on a spa." My voice resounded throughout the room as I roared. Daniel's pale visage emerged in the doorway. "Catherine, please." "No, this is stealing," I shot back, fury trembling through my voice. The room's tension increased. In an attempt to mediate, Daniel intervened. "I think we can work this out, Catherine. Mom and Dad?" He gave them a pleading look. Linda and Jacob shook their heads, obviously not caring. Daniel's attempts to appease me simply made me feel even more deceived. I retreated to my work, using it as my one means of escape, and left the room. Next, there was a promotion. When management contacted, they offered me a position as a senior graphic designer. I grasped the chance to spend more time in the office due to the increased workload as if it were my lifeline. I put in more hours at work since I was happy with my accomplishments and the companionship of my co-workers. I kept myself apart at home and concentrated on the future. My resentment of Daniel and his parents increased, which strengthened my resolve to act. Noah discovered me packing late one night as I was going through the vacant office. "Big plans for the weekend?" "More work," I said. "Keeps me sane." He gave a nod. "If you ever need to talk, you know where to look for me." I felt somewhat relieved by his encouragement, but I knew my main struggle was still to come. I had to do whatever it took to get my life back. I began to write down my next course of action, each little detail strengthening my resolve. There was a message pinned to the front door as I opened it. "Absent for a week. We'll be back soon," Linda wrote in her pretty handwriting. Anger made my heart race after it had dropped. They hadn't even brought up the trip, much less requested authorization to depart in this manner. Though my head was full of options, I knew one thing for sure. I was sick of being their doormat. My footsteps reverberated throughout the deserted house as I entered. The kitchen was a complete disaster, with crumbs all over the surfaces and dirty dishes stacked in the sink. It wasn't any better in the living room. Linda's knitting needles were knotted on the coffee table, magazines were all over the place, and the TV was still on. I murmured, "Unbelievable," and reached for a garbage bag. Upon moving through the house, I came across my credit card bill lying on the dining table. As I opened it, my hands shook. Each charge felt like a kick to the face. My eyes expanded upon discovering that their impromptu vacation had cost several $1,000s. With anger brewing inside of me, I phoned Daniel's number. "Hey, Catherine," he said in an oddly at ease tone. "Where the hell are you?" I insisted. "Oh, we plan to take a quick trip to Las Vegas," he murmured. "I thought I informed you." "No, you didn't," I yelled, "and you used my credit card again." Daniel tried to explain. "Catherine, it's not like that." But I lost patience. "Daniel, enough is enough. This is quite impolite. Your parents and you have stepped over every bound. We are going to have a serious conversation when you return. Something has to change." "You took them on a holiday with my money while I'm here sweating my tail off," I yelled. His response was silence, which was indicative of his typical avoidance tactic. "What do you know?" I said coldly. "Enjoy your trip," and hung up. I was alone in the house, and my anger drove my actions. My first morning call to a lawyer was made. "I need to schedule an urgent appointment to discuss selling a house," I said. I then got in touch with a real estate agent. I gave the order. "I want the house on the market immediately. How fast can we move with the current market?" "Quite fast," the representative answered. "We'll start the paperwork right away." Over the following few days, I carefully packed my stuff. Nothing was going to be left up to chance. As I sealed each package, my determination grew stronger. And downtown, I discovered a tiny apartment that was ideal for starting again. It was thrilling to feel like I had control over my life again. I went through the house room by room, mentally noting what I should bring and what I should leave behind. The sweetest kind of revenge was the idea of selling what they had taken over. Daniel called me multiple times, but I didn't answer. His justification simply made it more difficult for me to see clearly. With each box I packed, I moved one step closer to my freedom and away from the cage my house had turned into. I spent my final night there, the house all tidied up and ready for sale. It seemed strange, like peeling off old skin. Similar to the emotional emptiness that Daniel and his parents left behind, the space was vacant. I could practically hear their voices criticizing and shaming me, but I stopped caring at that point. The action was completed. They wouldn't recognize the location or their authority over it when they got back. With a last look around, I locked the door, stepping out into the cool night air, savoring the first taste of freedom and the sweet scent of impending karma. The door creaked shut behind me as I entered my new apartment, a small, tidy space downtown. My boxes were neatly stacked along the wall, and the sight of them made me feel a deep sense of accomplishment. One by one, I began to unpack, each item finding its place in my new home. This was my fresh start, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. The weight of the past few months lifted, replaced by a determination to re-Catherine my life and happiness. I needed to make some preparations, but first I went to see my lawyer. "Everything appears to be in order, Catherine," she verified as she looked through the prepared documents. "We can expedite the sale if you're certain about this." "Go ahead and do it," I said without thinking. The real estate agent's office was our next destination. She told me, "The house is now listed." "I already have a number of questions." "Amazing," I exclaimed, experiencing a hint of contentment. "Make it happen as quickly as you can." As the days went by, I managed to balance my secret operation with my job. I was the hard-working graphic designer by day, devoting myself to my new position. I furnished the place with necessities at night to make it feel more like home. Daniel's sole signals to me were attempts to calm my raging fury, but they were met with silence. One night in particular, as is now my norm, I arrived at work after hours. As my coworker Noah packed things to depart, he noticed me. Leaning over my desk, he asked, burning the midnight oil again? Yeah, lots to do, I answered in a light-hearted manner. Do you want to get a coffee? He said, You seem like you could use a break. Yes, I replied, understanding that a little normalcy would be beneficial. We sipped our beverages in convivial solitude in the cafe until Noah cut us off. He asked less of a question and more of a statement. Something's been bugging you. I let out a sigh and considered whether to let him handle my mess. At home, it's complicated, I eventually said. He said, If you ever need help, I'm here. And his genuineness touched me in a way Daniel never could. I whispered, Thanks, Noah, realizing how much I appreciated the gesture. My real estate agent called me early the next morning. We have a buyer, Catherine, she said. They want to close quickly and are offering more than the asking price. My heart gave a jump. What wonderful news. Let's proceed with it now. The decision's weight began to lessen as the day went on. With the house sold, I was finally free of the poison that had taken over my life. I began to feel more and more free and empowered. I went back to my flat, imagining what Daniel's parents would have looked like when they got back. They would be unaware of the impact. Formally obtaining a divorce was the final detail. I saw to it that the paperwork was ready for their return. My strategy was flawless, with every move carefully considered and carried out. As I packed the rest of my house possessions, I experienced an odd calmness. They had driven me to this point, and now they would pay the price. So I had no regrets. I shut the door for the last time, placing the key beneath the mat and writing, We're done. With my new life waiting for me, I moved away. I had worked so hard to regain control, and now it was finally mine. The burden left my shoulders as I moved in the direction of my future, to be replaced with fresh energy. I watched the clock's minute hand crawl as I stood by the window of my new apartment. They were going to return from their trip at any time. I could practically imagine their bewildered looks upon discovering they were shut out. My phone buzzed not too long after that, and it was Daniel. I gave it 2 rings before answering. What is going on? We're unable to enter the house. Daniel spoke in a panic. I sold it, I remarked coolly. On the other end of the telephone, there was quiet. You what? At last, Daniel spluttered. The house was sold by me. It's over, I said again, experiencing an odd wave of comfort. That is not possible for you to do. This is our house. Linda's voice sounded in the distance. No, I answered, sounding as steely as I could. It served as my house. All you've been are uninvited guests. I allowed their astonishment and bewilderment sink in as I ended the call. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, relishing the feeling of taking back command of my life. With every second that went by, the weight of their contempt and manipulation grew lighter. I was determined not to allow anything or anyone take away from my fresh start. I stood firm as Daniel, Linda, and Jacob confronted me outside the lawyer's office, their faces a mixture of fury and desperation. Daniel began, trying to appeal to reason. Catherine, let's be reasonable. We can work this out. We tried, I countered sharply, my voice unwavering. You chose them over our marriage time and time again. This is the result. Linda stepped forward, her eyes blazing with anger. We took you in, treated you like family. Your idea of family is using me as a bank and a maid. I fired back, my frustration boiling over. That's not family. Neighbors had gathered around the lawyer's office, interested about the disturbance, and the scenario outside was heated in public. I firmly said, No, I'm done paying. And without thinking, I gave Daniel the divorce papers. Please sign these. We're done. Daniel hesitated, his face flushed with shame as he cast uneasy glances at the gathering crowd. Linda, however, ripped the papers out of my hand and was clearly shaken and angry. She yelled, You can't do this, with fury in her voice. We'll fight you. I fixed her with a stern stare. I said, Go ahead, making sure the neighbors could hear me clearly. However, you'll discover that you have no standing in law. Now it's my life, my money, and my house. Jacob, unable to control his rage, tried to approach me, but Daniel stopped him, appearing defeated and surrendered. Please just sign the paperwork, Dad, Daniel whispered. We have no choice. Linda gave me one last fierce glance, then grudgingly reached for a pen and signed the divorce papers with shaking hands. Jacob did the same, his rage obvious in the tight air. Daniel signed last, his eyes briefly locking with mine before he turned away and quietly said, Goodbye. The consequences for Daniel, Linda, and Jacob was severe and happened quickly in the days that followed the altercation in the attorney's office. They hurried to find somewhere to stay, their plans derailed, and their hold on me broken. They checked into a small motel nearby. Rumor has it that I heard. Their concerns about the thin walls and bad service had supplanted their prior sense of grandeur. Back at my flat, I was enjoying my newfound independence and serenity. I grinned sincerely for the first time in months, feeling free and in control. My desire for vengeance had subsided, and I was able to concentrate on starting over in my new life. Every little thing I did in my new apartment felt like a celebration of my newfound independence. Every day seemed to promise better things, and the air felt cleaner. My coworkers noticed the fresh enthusiasm I was projecting at work. Specifically, Noah remarked on how radiant I seemed, feeling that something good had happened to me. Noah said, Catherine, you're glowing, one day when we were working together on a project. Did something good happen? You could certainly say that, I said with a sincere grin. It felt more energizing to take back control of my life than any opulent indulgence could have. Linda and Jacob's attempts to turn things around were falling apart in the meanwhile. Jacob asked his business contacts for help, thinking he may get a place to stay temporarily or some money. But he was coldly turned down every time. Under the careful examination of my attorney, Kate, Linda's threats of legal action quickly evaporated as she confidently assured me. Don't worry, Catherine, Kate said me over the phone. They don't have anything to stand on. You ensured that. I refuse to feel sorry for them anymore, I said angrily, not wanting to give in to Linda's threats or attempts to put me in her place. She called out, unable to contain herself, but I was unwavering. Catherine, this is not over. You'll pay for making us seem bad, Linda spit into the phone. I laughed, startling even myself with how lighthearted I sounded. Your threats are baseless, Linda. Proceed. Click. I hung up after that, feeling as though a burden had been lifted. After hearing my side of the conversation, Noah arched an eyebrow. Everything okay? Better than okay. I smiled in response. It felt freeing to finally be free from their poisoned hold. Daniel tried one last desperate attempt, arriving at my flat once, his eyes pleading. Catherine, please, can we talk? Arms crossed, I leaned against the doorway to brace myself against any manipulation of my emotions. Daniel, talk about what? You made the decisions, he began. I'm sorry, but I interrupted him. It was far past time to apologize. I firmly responded to Daniel. Sorry isn't satisfactory enough, and I stood my ground. You picked them over us, over me, and now you face the consequences of that. Daniel's face was marked with regret, and his shoulders slumped. I didn't know things would get this bad. Well, they did, I clearly said. It's time for you to take care of it now. Daniel, goodbye. Shutting the door on him was like closing a book on the final traces of my former life. I experienced a surge of confidence, a definite indication that I was making progress. That day after work, I caught up with Noah. He said, You really are something, Catherine, with awe in his eyes. I just said, just doing what needed to be done, in response. I raised a glass to my newfound calmness back in my apartment. It was about regaining my independence and my life, not just about getting even. The icing on the cake was witnessing Daniel, Linda, and Jacob in distress. I cuddled up with a book and felt so comfortable in my own place. For the first time in a long time, the drama had passed, and I could look forward to a bright future.